April 4th or 5th, I did the second hike in 2017. I took a bus over to Gainesville, Georgia, spent the night there in a hotel because of the severe weather. The next day, I got a shuttle over to Indian Grave Gap, where I left off after the first section hike. Hiked over to mile 71. I guess that's about 16 miles, with a little short side trip to top of Georgia Hostel for some Advil, which they didn't have, which I thought was odd. That night I got my first try at using the Z-Packs duplex. It started raining that morning. I bailed out at a shelter after a few miles to wait out the rain. There was a poor woman there that was having a problem with kidney stones. She had sent a couple family members for help. I left there after about 2 hours, and a mile or maybe 2 miles up the northbound trail, I ran into two EMTs carrying a board south towards her. I guess that's how they were going to get her out of there, on foot. I guess there was no way to get a helicopter close due to the trees. That night I stayed at Muskrat Gap Shelter, and it snowed, and we had thunder snow. Sounded like the storm was right on top of us all night. I don't know how close we were to the mountain peak, but it's kind of scary at times. It was so loud. The next morning, got to hike in this snow and slushy sleet stuff on the trail. Got to, I believe it's Carter Gap. It's coldest night I've had on the trail. My Nemo 25 bag and my 15-degree bag liner did not do well at all. I had everything I owned on, and I still felt like I was going to freeze to death. Got up in the morning, my shoes were frozen solid. Probably took 10 minutes to get both of them on. I wasn't smart enough to know at the time, I don't think, but my Sawyer Mini probably froze, but I wasn't smart enough to know that was an issue at the time. The next day, I went to Albert Mountain. If you've not done that before, and if you're like me, you're close to 70, there's a little blue trail right before you get to the peak that you can take as a bypass if you're not up to a rock scramble. Anyway, that's a 100-mile mark. So I got to mile 105 thereabouts. That's Rock Gap, and that's where I got the ride into town to Franklin to have a good meal. I zeroed there as I needed to see the urgent care folks. I had bronchitis, and I did a resupply at Ingalls. The next day was a Sunday, and I had no chance. I couldn't get a shuttle out of that town, so I started walking, and after a mile or two, I finally got a ride with a couple from Georgia that took me over to the trail, and I hiked, 19 miles to got to Cold Springs Shelter. It's a little bitty shelter right on the trail with a privy and a creek right there. Of course, it was full. A few yards up the trail and up a slight climb, there's all kinds of tent sites. There was probably 30, 40 people there that day. Pitched my tent in a nice quiet spot with a great view of sunrise, sunsets, and thought I'd go up to a campfire, maybe socialize, something I hadn't done a lot of. but everybody was like 12 years old and smoking weed, so I didn't quite fit in. So I went back to my tent, ate dinner, and went to bed. Sorry about the background noise. I got a helicopter that's circling for some reason. Next day I got up and it was 12 or 13 miles, primarily downhill all the way into NOC. This section of the video is to describe my trip home. I decided to bail out at the NOC, head home for my anniversary, 49th wedding anniversary, and Easter weekend. I got a ride right there at the knock. I didn't understand what the gentleman was telling me about how far he could take me. Turned out it was only 2 or 3 miles up the road, and it led me out on a curve on a hill in a little or small business parking lot. Turned out to be a terrible place to catch a ride. Stood there for probably 2 hours. Eventually got a ride from a guy, I believe he worked at the outfitters there at the NOC. He took me quite a ways down the road, and he let me out, not on the 4-lane road, but close to it, and I used a phone at a local business there to find out about a taxi or shuttle. The only price I could come up with was like $125, so I decided to go back to the road and to hitchhike. And as I was walking down the on-ramp to this divided highway, a car pulls over and asked me if I'm looking for a shuttle. I said, well, I'd like to ride to Asheville. And this guy starts waving a AWOL guide in front of me, my face, telling me he had an autograph and he was the shuttle driver, and he could make room in his little hatchback car with his big dog and all of his trash, if I want to negotiate a price with him. And we did come to an agreement of $75 for a ride to Asheville. My only two choices were to go to Knoxville or Asheville. So I get in this guy's car, and my gear's back in the back with the dog, and we're driving down the road. Within 5 minutes, he calmly mentions the fact that, man, I need an oil change. I'm pounding away on my iPad trying to find out information about bus schedules and airlines and motels. I said, come on, man. We just negotiated a price to Asheville, and there was no stops involved for oil changes. If you just now need one, you can make it a few miles further. So that was into that discussion. We kept going. After a few more miles, he finally blurted out what his real issue was, that he owned a hostel in Franklin, and why don't we go over there and spend the night, and he'd take me to Asheville in the morning. I said, come on, man, I'm trying to get home for my wedding anniversary. So he acquiesced, and we're still on this 4-lane road heading to Asheville, and he says, hey, look at that, they're spraying again. And he's looking up in the sky. And I put down my iPhone. I said, what are you talking about, they're spraying? And he says, look up there. And what he's talking about is some jet contrails. And I call him out on it. No, man, those are jet contrails. Those are airliners. No, they're spraying. I saw that plane this morning over Franklin. I said, what do you mean you saw that plane? It's probably 35,000 feet. No, it's the same tail number. It's the same plane they're spraying, he says. I said, no, you can't see that. I'm sorry. He goes, no, in Franklin, you're closer. I'm thinking, yeah, right. You're 500 feet closer, maybe. Even if you're 1,000 feet closer. Unless you got X-ray vision, you ain't seeing that. So finally, I lose patience with the guy because I'm thinking I'm not going to get there in time to catch that 4 or 4:15 bus, whatever it was. And I told the guy, I said, I'm sorry, I'm just not buying into whatever theory you have about a conspiracy you have about the government spraying the population. I'm sorry. And I thought that was going to be the end of it until he came up with something else. Well, about 2 minutes later, he just explodes into a fit of rage and starts dropping F-bombs all over the place and telling me to get out of his effing car. And we're going 70 miles an hour, so that's not a real possibility. And I tell him so. Yeah, he didn't calm down at all. He's just going like crazy with the F-bombs and telling me that he can see why the trail chewed me up and spit me out, why I didn't make it through, hiker, and all kinds of pleasant things. So he finally lets me out in a small town, and I'm thinking he's going to drive off between the time I get out of the car and before I can get to the hatchback to get my backpack and my poles. But he didn't. But he did cuss me all the way to the door of the little 7-Eleven type gas station that he let me out at. So I eventually got a ride from a local yokel taxi. Cost me $100. I got to Asheville. Of course, it was too late to go anywhere, so I stayed in a motel. Took a zero. Next day, I spent all day waiting on the 4 o'clock bus, which was half hour, 45 minutes late. So when the Greyhound bus gets to Knoxville, I get off the bus, and they herd me immediately onto another bus headed to Dallas, which was my destination. And within 5 minutes, we're heading down the road. Well, after about 45 minutes, the driver pulls over on the shoulder, and we sit there for about 5 minutes, and then she starts up again, and we go another 4 or 5 miles, and she pulls off the second time, and next thing I know, we're back on the road. We're getting off the interstate. Pretty sure it was 26. In any case, I'm sorry, Knoxville would have been Interstate 40. Anyway, we get off and we head back to Knoxville. Turns out in her haste to leave, that she went off and left somewhere 6 or 7 people that were on the same bus I was on from Knoxville. They didn't make their connections. So that trip starts out behind schedule, to say the least. So we're tooling down the road trying to make up time, and we run into a 2.5-hour delay on the interstate because a 18-wheeler carrying recycled scrap metal has been chewed up and put in on pallets. Anyway, it tipped over, and we sat there for the longest time. And while all this is going on, I'm in the back seat of the bus, and it's got to be 10 or 15 degrees hotter there, sitting on those diesels, or above those diesels, as anywhere else in the middle or forward part of the bus. So I'm not real thrilled with the way things are going. And 2 rows in front of me and on the right, there's a guy that's been running his mouth the whole evening. He He's an upstanding citizen that's on his way back from his first parole officer meeting since he's been out of prison. And he spent a good part of the evening telling everybody what a great dad he's going to be now that he's out, and how he's going to stick on the straight and narrow road to good citizenship. And he's also hitting on this gal sitting on the 2 rows in front of me on the left side. And he somehow manages to get drunk in those 2.5 hours, 3 hours that we've been on the bus. And he even tries to kiss this gal after letting everybody know he's married. And she doesn't appreciate it. So a good half hour or 45 minutes of ugliness ensues, words going back and forth between him and her and just about every guy in the immediate vicinity of her, because she's a cute little girl from Texas, and everybody's coming to her defense. Finally, one guy, a couple rows in front of him, just gets fed up with it, and he stands up and kind of challenges the guy to just shut his mouth. So the parolee jumps up, and here we go. We're getting ready to have an encounter of the, fisticuffs are about ready to ensue. And we're going at it verbally, toe to toe, and all of a sudden the drunk parolee, he grabs the other guy by the neck and pulls him forward and kisses him on the mouth. I don't know if he learned that in prison as a way to defuse a situation or what happened or how he came up with that, but it definitely had that effect. The other guy was so shocked and embarrassed and disgusted that this guy had kissed him on the mouth, and rather than hit him, he just kind of stood there dumbfounded and eventually sat down. He just shaking his head, couldn't believe that this guy kissed him on the mouth. Anyway, this parolee kept being obnoxious for a good another half hour. Finally, the bus driver had heard enough, and she pulled over and wanted to know what was going on and threatened to put the guy off if he didn't shut up and sit down and remain quiet. So he eventually got off down the road in Tennessee. I don't remember where. It's not important. The young gal that he was paying attention to, she cuddled up next to another guy. So I think maybe she might have encouraged this guy, and anyway, it got out of hand. She curled up next to this guy right in front of me. It turned out he was an ex-con as well. But he stayed on the bus till somewhere in Arkansas, and nothing much came of that. The night was kind of quiet after that. Couldn't get any food anywhere because we were late, and those bus stop cafes, diners, whatever they call them, don't stay open just because the bus is late. If they're supposed to close at 10 or 11, you get there a minute late and you're just out of luck. So the next morning, and a bus change or two later, we're going through East Texas, and we're in the lovely county that includes Sulphur Springs, Texas. And the local county sheriff, plainclothes deputies, they pull us over, and they start interrogating people and searching through the bags underneath the passenger area. I don't know. I don't remember if they had a drug sniffing dog or what, but they were just looking for drugs on a random basis, and apparently this was something that went on quite frequently. They just made a habit of stopping Greyhound buses and maybe other ones as well. No warrants, no probable cause. It's just something they did as a matter of routine. I'm not sure how they got away with it. So, the trip just won't end. It just one thing after another. So anyway, we leave there, and I'm thinking all I got to do is get to Dallas. Then I'm an Uber ride away from home and bed and a couple hours sleep. I get to Dallas and get off the bus, collect my stuff, walk around the corner, wait on my Uber ride, and there's a security guard there and a supervisor, and they're chatting, and they try to shoo me along. And I said, no, guys, I'm not going anywhere. Here, look, you can see my Uber ride's 1 minute away. I'm not leaving. And in that 1 minute, here comes some guy who's either hungover or still slightly drunk, and he engages the other two gentlemen in a conversation that I thought at first was friendly, but it turned ugly, and some unpleasantries were exchanged, and the guy walks past the security guard and his boss, and he gets to the crosswalk, gets halfway across the street, and he turns around and pulls out his Johnson and waves it at the other two, thinking, oh my goodness, what else is going to happen? Luckily, the Uber driver shows up. I get in. I don't get to see how that event turns out, but I eventually make it home about 3 hours late from what the original expectation was, and quite a few interesting events. I'm not even sure I don't even remember if I got any sleep that night. It was so much fun. But in any case, maybe your trip you'll have better logistics for your section hiking than I have so far. Bye. Just a little addendum. I forgot to mention that the shuttle driver on that 2-lane or 4-lane road to Asheville, the one that kicked me out with all the F-bombs, I believe his name was Zen. I believe he is the hostel owner there in Franklin. Last year in Maryland or southern Pennsylvania, I came across a guy from Switzerland. His trail name was Sparky, and we were talking about things we had seen on the trail, and I was telling him this story. He says, I know that guy. He says he was at Rock Gap outside of Franklin. He and some other folks were waiting on a shuttle, and this guy pulls up and tries to shuttle them to his hostel. And he gets real upset when he finds out they have made other arrangements. And he starts shouting at him and cussing him out. Same guy. So anyway, a word to the wise. Be careful whose vehicle you get into when you're in the Franklin vicinity. It may be this guy. And you may not make it to your destination.